Hello, my JTAL friends, and welcome to another Journey to Authentic Living episode. If you're not subscribed to my channel, please do by clicking the red button, and please do share with your friends and family. Let's get Journey to Authentic Living out there in the world so that other people can know about our tips and suggestions and healthy discussions on a variety of topics. Today, I want to talk about healthy boundaries a little bit more. I had a gentleman who actually reached out to me, somebody that I know on Instagram. It always seems to be Instagram followers who reach out. So bless you all for doing that and for following me as well on this channel, on this platform. Talking a little bit about healthy boundaries and watching my other videos about it and so forth. I mean, this is a really big discussion, right? I mean, we could really go on and on about it for quite a bit. And it's good. It's good that we talk about it and that we begin to practice and what it means and so forth. So I want to actually start out with a great quote by Harriet Lerner. And it says, "An intimate relationship is one in which neither party silences, sacrifices, or betrays the self, and each party expresses strength and vulnerability, weaknesses, and competence in a balanced way." I think this is like a really cool quote to begin with, right? Because healthy boundaries are about that. It's about learning to say no, understanding, what our yeses are and what our nos, but that's just the tip of the surface there. So creating healthy boundaries is extremely empowering. It's something that we all need to do. And healthy boundaries may be very different, excuse me, for you than for me, for example, right? And they can come in all areas of our life. I actually think that husband and wife or significant others need to have healthy boundaries. I think children and parents need to have healthy boundaries, need to have respect for each other. So it doesn't matter what role, right? It's kind of like a Buddhist way, or, honoring the other person that is in front of you, right? But it gets messy, doesn't it? Because we have ego and we have our insecurities and we feel inadequate, and we try to force people to do things, and we can be very manipulative too. Sometimes we don't mean to be, but we want our needs met. We have our desires and our needs, and by gosh, we're going to do everything to get them. Sometimes that's that mentality. Unhealthy boundaries cause a lot of emotional pain that can really lead to dependency and depression and anxiety, to just name a few, and also stress, to be honest. And here at Journey to Authentic Living, we're always talking about the mind-body connection. So we really want to be careful, because if we're stressed, if we're upset, if we're angry all the time, if we allow other people to aggravate us, we're going to fall physically ill. There's going to be something that's going to happen. And it doesn't have to be something like cancer, right? It could just be having digestive issues. It could be having a lot of headaches. We could have a lower or lower our immune system and so forth. So these are the things I'm talking about. Even back pain and hip pain, right? Because we feel burden. So it's very important to establish healthy boundaries for just some of these reasons. And there's so many other reasons why. When we don't establish healthy boundaries, it's kind of like leaving our front door open, just open to anyone coming in. It's like everyone is welcome. Whoever, it doesn't matter, negative person or positive person, wealthy person or poor person, it doesn't really matter, right? We just it's just a metaphor, right? And including that would be unwelcoming guests, to just use that as a metaphor. We don't want to have too rigid boundaries, because then we also suffer from isolation. We kind of like turn everybody off. So we can't be so rigid with that. We want to be able to look at ourselves and what is going on. Definitely important. So what I want to say is that, boundaries, if we can just give another metaphor, they're kind of like a property line, you know, without trying to sound like, you know, this is my territory. But when we're talking about the self, I think it's extremely important because, you know, each person's culture and their religion, right, we behave in certain ways. United States citizens behave differently than maybe people that are in the Middle East, and Middle Eastern people behave differently than maybe French people do, and French people certainly behave differently, you know, than maybe Italian, and so forth, right? There's different cultural. So that's why I say that healthy boundaries are different for different people. You know, in Europe, you can get very close, literally physically close to another individual. Some of you know I lived, I'm an Italian citizen. I lived in Italy for many years. And so it's very common to actually have someone right in your face talking to you. I mean, you can even smell their breath. That's how close they are. And in the United States, you really are sometimes even more than arm's length with an individual, which is interesting. But going back to that, it's the self, right? So a boundary is kind of a limitation that a person creates to identify for themselves what is reasonable, what is safe, what is permissible for other people to behave around them, and you know how they will respond when someone steps outside of those limits. You know, for example, you know, we don't, again, want to have this rigid, no trespassing type of thing because people don't always know what those limitations are. And this is why I've said in so many of my videos that communication is extremely important because people might not know. Sometimes it occurs in social media, for example, with myself or what have you. You know, I can't always answer to personal or professional emails all the time, right? There are a lot of people that have a lot of questions, so a lot of people that need help, but are not willing to set up maybe coaching sessions or something like that. And I try to do the best that I possibly can. And this is why I do these videos, because your questions are so important. I can, with one question answered and creating a video, I can really spread this out and have a lot of you watch this and perhaps glean some benefit from it, right? So sometimes I don't always have that physical availability, and quite frankly, not always the energy, right? It's very difficult to address each individual with just their issue. If I can, I will. But that would be considered a boundary. I don't always have the time. I have a lot of personal and professional commitments. So that would be considered, for example, a boundary. And it has happened where people have tried, well, actually did cross the boundary. You know, where sometimes I'm, you know, I've had to say, you know, I really have a lot of commitments, which is true. It's not a lie. I'm a very transparent person. I don't need to lie to anyone. I don't need to pretend or beat around the bush. It's like, I just sometimes don't have that availability. For whatever reason, I'm not available. And it has happened where people have tried to push and try to force me into doing things, and I just won't go down that road, right? That's when it can get a little bit ugly, and it's unfortunate, but you just, you know, you might lose a friend or an acquaintance or somebody that's following you, but, you know, I'm not going to be coerced into doing something because you feel that your needs are not being met, right? On both sides, there is a way to handle each person, but we have to have respect, because when a person is not listening to you, is not honoring the fact that you just don't have time to pay one-on-one attention to them, and they're not respecting that, then you have to look within yourself and make decisions of whether that's appropriate or not for you. So again, personal boundaries will help us decide what type or types of communication, behavior, and interaction are acceptable, right? So if I have, for example, an altercation, or somebody is upset about something, or they have a misunderstanding, or maybe they didn't meet their agreement with me for X, Y, and Z, or what have you, you know, I'm not going to lash out on them. That's my personal boundary for myself, because, well, I want to be respectful. You know, just because someone did something doesn't mean I have to dishonor them as a human being. I don't have to desecrate their humanness, if you will, right? But that's my personal and professional integrity. But sometimes it does call out, you know, it calls out for us as professionals and even in our personal life to sometimes be firm with people. You know, if you tell me you're going to show up for a 2 o'clock appointment and you decide to be late and then want me to extend that hour over the time, that's not available. But what I try to do is ensure it so that we have clear communication. That is why on a professional level, we have agreements and we have contracts. Because once you agree to that, once you sign that, you say, this is what's going to happen. Now, there are exceptions to that. So I don't want to sound, again, being rigid, but there are exceptions to that. You know, I have to pay people and people have to pay me at a reasonable time. You have to, you know, if you have time and you remember to pay your gas and electric bill, you have to pay this bill as well. And I have to do the same. You know, as a professional, if I don't honor my commitments to my clients and just say, oh, well, that's okay, I can be 5 minutes or 10 minutes late. Like sometimes we see this in the doctor's offices now with our healthcare in the United States. It's not normal anymore. It's become so crazy that, you know, the doctors don't honor. Let me give you an example. Last week, I had to take my elderly mother to the doctor. And we arrived early for the appointment, of course. But overall, it took 2 hours before my mother's general practitioner could actually see her. We were in total about 3.5 hours at the doctor's office. That's a long time, right? So it's unfortunate that these things happen, but they do. I guess I could try to go to another doctor, but it's happened before. So there's something broken within the healthcare system. But just because we see that in the realm of the medical field is not an excuse for us to cross someone else's professional boundaries as well, right? Because we'd all just not have work and we'd all be, you know, everywhere. So that's a kind of an example of a boundary. The personal boundary as well. You know, I'm not going to allow my husband or my boyfriend or my mother, my father, you know, to disrespect me, right? There's a certain way that we need to behave with each other. And I realize that we all struggle in relationships. You know, we sometimes come from unhealthy relationships, but when you begin to empower yourself, those boundaries come naturally. You're just not going to accept that anymore. And there reaches a point where you communicate that with the individual you're talking to. So this is about practicing self-care and self-respect. First and foremost, before you can set a boundary, a healthy boundary with another person, before you can sort of communicate that. And again, it's not linear, but we have to respect ourselves. I'm not saying that we have to be this perfect human, enlightened human being before we let other people respect us, but we need to have a sense that that's not right. Yeah, we need to self-care for ourselves. One of the things I've noticed throughout my life, there are exceptions always, but what I have noticed is the people who actually don't or have not established healthy boundaries for themselves usually violate other people's boundaries. I've seen this in the best of people, very, very nice people that come to me, or I've seen it or watched it, you know, they have very weak or none of the healthy boundaries to establish. So it's difficult for them to respect another person. They don't understand, right? Especially when you have a lot of people who are wanting your time and your energy, and they're very needy, right? Well, they don't have healthy boundaries and they don't respect yours. So that's something to look out for and to watch out for. So again, I want to say self-respect, self-care. You want to communicate. It's extremely important to communicate. When you communicate this to your acquaintances, your friends, your boss, it doesn't matter. There's a way to do it, which I'm not going to talk about in this video unless you're interested. We need to communicate that. it is true that we can't change other people. We can only change ourselves. We try to communicate the best we can. And it is unfortunate. I admit, and I've experienced on the other side, as much as I've tried to convey to another individual that this is not appropriate behavior, you know, in a different way. I mean, you just don't go up to someone and accost them. And unless you're exasperated, sometimes it can happen. But when you communicate to the person and say this or that, for example, and they are not honoring that, well, then at that point, you have to make a deeper, more in-depth decision about whether to stay or to go. But my suggestion is practice with that person. Practice with those people who do cross your boundaries. Feel what it's like to be uncomfortable, to confront that other individual, to say, no, the buck stops here. You know, this is not appropriate. So that's what I would practice doing. Make time and space for positive interaction. So you want to be with people who are supportive of you, who are cheerleaders in your life. You know, people who understand, who want to learn and who want to grow, where you both can grow together, right? You don't want a downer. You don't want someone lamenting or going like, well, I wouldn't do that if I were you, something like this, right? Positive interaction. We want to feed ourselves with and when I say positive people, I don't mean just people who are always smiling and faking it. I'm just talking about people who are very supportive. And then learn to set limits in your relationship, in all your relationships, in a way that is healthy and that's beneficial. You'll be surprised that other people will also learn these healthy boundaries. The people who push or resist your boundaries are because they themselves do not understand healthy boundaries. Okay, so I hope this video has been helpful, and please do comment below, and I welcome any other suggestions. And thank you again, Tom, for your wonderful question, and we'll talk soon. Take care. Ciao.